The soldiers did not put Kyle in chains, but they made it very clear he was not free to go. They flew him and Alindra back to the capital city in the military transport, and Kyle spent the whole flight sitting on a metal bench between two guards who were each a full head taller than him and armed with weapons that could turn him into ash. Alindra sat on the other side of the transport. She did not look at him. She did not speak. Her leg had been treated by an HFY medic the moment they boarded, and whatever they used worked fast. She was already walking with only a slight limp. Kyle's back and ribs, on the other hand, were still killing him. The capital city of Valora Prime was called Savarath. Kyle saw it through the transport window, and his breath caught in his throat. It was the most beautiful place he had ever seen. Silver towers rose high into the sky, thin and curved like the stems of flowers. Bridges of light connected them at different levels. Gardens floated in the air, on platforms held up by some kind of energy field, covered in plants that glowed soft gold and violet. Rivers of clear water ran through the city, in channels carved from crystal. Kyle had grown up in a small house with a leaky roof. He had shared a room with his younger brother until he was 17. He had joined the Earth Alliance because the signing bonus was enough to help his mom pay off her car. Now he was being flown into the most advanced city in the known galaxy because he had pulled a girl out of a wreck. They landed on a platform at the top of the tallest tower. Kyle was taken to a room that was bigger than his entire apartment back on the station. The walls were smooth silver. The bed was wide and soft, and seemed to adjust to his body when he sat on it. There was a window that stretched from floor to ceiling, and through it he could see the whole city spread out below, shining in the late afternoon light. A team of HFY healers came in and treated his injuries. They used tools and medicines Kyle had never seen before. The cut above his eye closed completely in seconds. The burns on his back faded to nothing. His cracked ribs knitted together so fast he could feel them moving under his skin, which was deeply unpleasant but effective. Then they left him alone, for hours. Kyle sat on the bed and tried to figure out what was happening. He had saved the life of an alien princess. That was good. But the way the commander had spoken, the way Alindra had gone quiet, the way the soldiers had looked at him, all of it told him that something bigger was going on, something he did not understand. The door opened just before sunset. 2 guards stepped aside, and a figure walked in that made Kyle stand up straight without thinking. High Sovereign Thalric Sylvanas was enormous. He stood close to 8 feet tall, broad across the shoulders, with silver skin that seemed to glow faintly from within. His amber eyes were the same shade as his daughter's, but where hers were warm, his were cold and heavy with authority. He wore a long robe of dark metal thread that moved like fabric, but sounded like wind chimes when he walked. This was the most powerful person in the HFY Dominion. This was Alindra's father, and he was standing 3 feet from Kyle, looking down at him the way a mountain looks down at a stone. "Lieutenant Kyle Dawson," Thalric said. His voice was deep, calm, and carried the kind of weight that made you want to listen. "You saved the life of my daughter." "Yes, sir. She was hurt. I helped." "You did more than help. You cut her free from wreckage with a tool meant for fixing shuttle panels. You carried her half a mile through an alien forest with broken ribs. You shielded her from an explosion with your own body." Thalric paused. "You asked nothing in return." Kyle shifted on his feet. It was the right thing to do. Thalric studied him for a long, silent moment. Then he nodded once, slowly. "That is exactly what makes this so difficult." He told Kyle about the law of Vela's binding. It was old, older than the HFY space program, older than their written history, possibly older than their civilization itself. The law said this: when a life is saved by someone who acts without any thought of reward, a bond must be formed between the one who was saved and the one who saved them. It was part political alliance, part spiritual connection, and part marriage. Kyle listened to all of this with his arms crossed and his stomach sinking. "You are telling me," he said slowly, "that because I pulled your daughter out of a wreck, I have to marry her." "The binding is more than a marriage," Falric said. "But in terms you would understand, yes. Sir, I am a supply pilot. I fix engines. I eat ration bars for dinner. I am not exactly royal husband material. The law does not ask about rank or wealth. It asks about character. Can she say no?" Falric's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted. "She can, but the consequences would be severe. If the sovereign house refuses to honor its own most sacred law, it signals weakness. There are rival houses that would use that weakness to challenge our authority. It could destabilize the Dominion. And if I say no, the HFY helped secure humanity's seat on the Galactic Concord. My vote made the difference. If you refuse this, that support goes away, and your species loses its place at the table." Kyle felt the weight of that settle onto his shoulders like a sack of bricks. This was not just about him. This was about Earth, about every human in the galaxy, about the seat on the Concord that had taken decades to earn. "How long do I have to decide?" Kyle asked. 3 days. Kyle spent those 3 days doing everything he could to understand what he was walking into. He read about the binding ceremony, about HFY customs, about their history. He talked to the Earth Alliance embassy on Velora. And his commanding officer, Captain Laura Webb, told him the truth. Earth needs this alliance, Kyle. If the HFY pull their support, we are back to square one. 20 years of diplomacy, gone. She paused. "But I will not order you to do this. No one will. This is your choice." Kyle nodded. "I understand." He also talked to Alindra. They met in one of the floating gardens above the city. It was quiet up there. The air smelled like sweet rain. Plants with silver leaves swayed in a gentle breeze. Alindra stood near the edge, looking out at the city below. She was different here than she had been in the forest, more guarded, more careful. In the forest, she had been hurt and scared and had let her walls come down a little. Here in the capital, surrounded by politics and expectations, those walls were back up. "I need to know what this means to you," Kyle said. "Not the law, not the politics, you." She did not answer right away. She looked at him for a long time, as if she was trying to figure out if he was real. "I have been prepared my entire life to be joined to someone chosen for political advantage," she said finally. "A lord from a powerful house. Someone who would want me for my title, not for me. That is how it has always been done. Dot. And now you are stuck with a supply pilot from Ohio. Dot. The smallest hint of a smile touched her lips. You were not chosen by anyone. You just showed up. You saw a stranger trapped and dying, and you ran toward the fire instead of away from it. You did not know who I was. You did not care." She paused. "Do you know how rare that is? Not just among humans, among anyone." Kyle did not know what to say to that. "I am not asking you to love me," Alindra said. "I am not even asking you to stay. I am asking you to understand that for the first time in my life, someone came for me without wanting something in return. And that means more to me than any law." That night, Kyle sat alone on the balcony of his room. The city glowed below him. The 2 moons hung in the sky, silver and gold. He thought about Ohio, about his mom, about the life he had always thought he would live. Quiet, small, normal. Then he thought about Alindra standing in that garden, telling him he was the first person who had ever helped her just because she needed help. On the morning of the 3rd day, Kyle walked into the Sovereign Hall. Falric was there, along with a dozen high-ranking HFY lords and ladies. Alindra stood near the far wall, her hands clasped in front of her. Kyle looked at Thalric. I accept. The hall was silent. You understand what this means? Thalric asked. Probably not all of it, Kyle said honestly, but I am willing to figure it out. Thalric looked at him for a long time. Then, for the first time since Kyle had met him, the High Sovereign's hard face softened just a little. Perhaps, Thalric said quietly, we have underestimated your kind. She was looking at him, and in her amber eyes he saw something he had not seen before. It was not love, not yet, but it was hope, and that was enough to start with. The challenge came on a cold morning, 10 days before the binding ceremony. Lord Mereth Tyvos walked into the Sovereign Hall, wearing his full ceremonial armor, polished to a mirror shine. His son Corvan stood at his side, tall and straight, a Vela blade hanging at his hip. The court was full. Every noble house had sent a representative. The air was thick with tension. Mereth stopped in the center of the hall and spoke in a voice loud enough to reach every corner of the room. I invoke the right of contested worth. The hall went dead quiet. Kyle, who was standing near the back with 2 Earth Alliance diplomats, did not know what those words meant, but the look on every Aethrani face told him it was bad. Thalric, seated on the sovereign throne, did not move. His amber eyes locked onto Mereth like a blade. On what grounds? Thalric asked. On grounds of species incompatibility, Mereth said. The binding is sacred. It demands a worthy candidate. I submit that a human, a creature of limited lifespan, limited strength, and limited understanding of our ways, is not worthy to be bound to the heir of the sovereign house. He paused. I offer my son, Corvan, as a competing claimant. Let them settle it in the old way. Single combat. Winner earns the right to the binding. The court erupted. Voices clashed. Some supported Mereth. Others were horrified. Aelindra stepped forward, her face tight with anger. This is not the old way, she said. This is politics disguised as tradition. The right is legal, Mereth replied smoothly. I have checked every record. It has not been invoked in 400 years, but it has never been removed from the books. Your father knows this. Everyone looked at Thalric. The High Sovereign sat still for a long moment. Then he nodded, once. The right is valid, he said. His voice was heavy. It cannot be denied without denying the law itself. Kyle felt the floor drop out from under him. He looked across the hall at Corvan. The Aethrani was a full foot taller than him, broader, faster, and had trained in combat since he was a child. Kyle had basic military hand-to-hand training, and a lot of stubbornness. That was it. I accept, Kyle said. Every head in the room turned toward him. Aelindra found him in the corridor afterward. She grabbed his arm and pulled him into an empty room. Her eyes were blazing. You do not have to do this, she said. There are legal ways to fight this. My father could find a loophole. Your father cannot block a legal challenge without looking like he is bending the law for a human. That would give Mereth exactly what he wants. Kyle shook his head. I have to fight. Corvan is one of the best fighters in the Dominion. He is trained with a Vela blade since he was 6 years old. Stronger than you. He has reach you cannot match. I know. Then how can you possibly win? Kyle looked at her. I did not say I was going to outfight him. I said I was going to fight him. There is a difference. That is not comforting. No, Kyle agreed. It is not. He spent the next 7 days preparing. He could not match Corvan in speed, strength, or technique, so he did not try. Instead, he studied Corvan. He watched recordings of his previous duels. He noted his patterns, his habits, the small tells that gave away his next move. He trained in close quarters fighting, the kind of ugly, cramped combat, where size and reach mattered less. Captain Laura Webb, watching from the embassy, sent him a message. Remember what Sergeant Keegan always said in training. Kyle smiled. Sergeant Keegan had been his hand-to-hand instructor back at the academy. The man had been 5'6", built like a fire hydrant, and could put soldiers twice his size on the ground. His favorite saying was simple: if you cannot beat them clean, beat them ugly. The duel was held in the arena of Vela, the same ancient amphitheater where Kyle had faced the Shadow Beast. This time, the stands were packed. Thousands of Athrani filled the stone seats. Representatives from the Earth Alliance stood in a special section near the top. And scattered among the crowd were diplomats from a dozen other Concord species, all watching to see what would happen. Kyle walked onto the sand floor of the arena, wearing light armor borrowed from the Earth Alliance armory. It was functional, not pretty. He carried a short sword in one hand and a combat knife in the other. No shield, no energy weapons. Korvan entered from the other side. He was dressed in traditional Athrani dueling armor, silver and white, with a Vela blade in his hand. The blade hummed with contained energy, a curved sword that could cut through steel and burn flesh on contact. The crowd fell silent. The judge called the rules. First to yield, first to be unable to continue. No killing strikes. Everything else was permitted. The signal was given. The duel began. Corvin moved first. He closed the distance in 2 long strides and swung the Vela blade in a wide, sweeping arc aimed at Kyle's chest. It was fast, blindingly fast. Kyle barely got his short sword up in time to deflect it. The impact rattled his arm to the shoulder. Corvin pressed the attack. His style was beautiful. Clean cuts, smooth footwork, precise angles. Every strike flowed into the next like water. Kyle retreated, blocking and dodging, taking hits he could not avoid. The Vela blade burned through his light armor like it was cloth. A slash across his forearm opened a wound that sizzled with heat. A strike to his ribs made him stagger. For the first 2 minutes, it looked like an execution. Then Kyle stopped retreating. He had been watching Korvan's pattern. Every 4th strike, Korvan reset his stance and pulled the blade back for a heavy downward cut. It was a habit, drilled into him by years of formal training. And in that half-second reset, his guard dropped on the left side. Kyle waited for it. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the 4th strike, as Korvan pulled back, Kyle surged forward. He got inside the reach of the Vela blade, so close that the long weapon became useless. Korvan tried to step back, but Kyle was already on him. Kyle hit him with an elbow to the jaw, then a knee to the thigh, then a headbutt that caught Korvan right on the bridge of his nose. The Athrani stumbled backward, his amber eyes wide with shock. Violet blood dripped from his nose. The crowd gasped. He stayed close, too close for the Vela blade to swing properly. He used his knife to block, his short sword to strike, and everything else, shoulders, elbows, knees, to create chaos. It was not elegant. It was not pretty. It was street fighting, mixed with military combat training, and it was brutally effective. Korvan was not used to this. His training was built on distance and precision. In close quarters, against a human who fought like a cornered animal, his advantages melted away. He managed to land a solid hit on Kyle's shoulder that drew blood and made his left arm go numb. He caught Kyle with a kick to the leg that nearly buckled his knee, but Kyle did not stop. He took the hits and kept coming. They fought for 4 more minutes. Both of them were bleeding. Both of them were exhausted. The arena was so quiet that every grunt and clash echoed off the crystal walls. Kyle saw his opening. Korvan overextended on a thrust, leaning forward just a fraction too far. Kyle sidestepped, caught Korvan's wrist, twisted it hard, and stripped the Vela blade from his hand. It clattered across the sand. In the same motion, Kyle hooked Korvan's ankle and swept him to the ground. Before Corvan could rise, Kyle was on top of him, his knife pressed flat against the Athrani's throat. "Yield," Kyle said. He was breathing so hard he could barely speak. Blood ran from the wound on his arm and dripped onto the sand. Corvan looked up at him. For a moment, something passed between them. Not hatred, not even anger, but a kind of understanding. Corvan closed his eyes. "I yield," he said. The arena exploded with sound. Thousands of Athrani on their feet, hands clapping in that slow, rhythmic beat of respect that Kyle had heard once before, after the Shadow Beast trial. But this was louder. This was something more. His legs were shaking. His left arm hung limp at his side. He could feel blood soaking through his shirt in at least 3 places. He looked down at Corvan, and then he did something that shocked the entire arena. He reached down and offered his hand. Corvan stared at it. In Athrani dueling tradition, the loser left the arena in silence. No hand was offered. No hand was expected. But Kyle was not Athrani. Corvan took his hand and let Kyle pull him to his feet. "Good fight," Kyle said. Corvan looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You fight like nothing I have ever seen." "I will take that as a compliment." It was. In the Sovereign Hall that evening, Thalric stood before the court and declared the matter settled. The right of contested worth had been answered. The binding would proceed. Lord Merith stood in the back of the hall with a face like stone. He had played his last card. He turned and walked out without a word. That night, Aelindra came to the medical wing where Kyle was being patched up for what felt like the 100th time. She stood in the doorway and looked at him, sitting on the table, bruised and bandaged, and grinning like an idiot. "You won," she said. "Barely. You could have been killed. But I was not." She walked over to him and stood very close. She reached up and touched the side of his face, gently, just her fingertips against his cheek. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "The trials, the duel, all of it. You had every reason to walk away." Kyle looked into her amber eyes. "Because you are worth fighting for. And where I come from, when someone is worth fighting for, you do not walk away. That is the whole thing. That is all of it." Then she said a phrase in old Athrani, soft and musical. Words that Kyle did not fully understand, but could feel in his chest like a heartbeat. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means my heart sees yours," she said, "and it is not afraid." Kyle nodded slowly. "Mine either." Outside the window, the 2 moons of Velora hung in the sky, silver and gold, and the city below glowed like a sea of stars. The morning of the binding ceremony, Kyle woke before dawn. He lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling of his room in the Sovereign Palace. The ceiling was made of a translucent crystal that slowly brightened as the sun rose, shifting from deep violet to soft gold. It was beautiful. Everything on this planet was beautiful, and in a few hours he was going to be permanently tied to it. He sat up, put his feet on the cool floor, and took a deep breath. 2 months ago, he had been a supply pilot. His biggest worry had been a faulty fuel gauge on his shuttle. Now he was about to stand on a sacred mountain and bind his life to an alien princess in front of thousands of people and representatives from 12 different species. "Not exactly how I planned my year," he muttered to himself. A knock came at the door. It was Aelindra's attendant, a small, quiet Athrani woman named Seva, who had been assigned to help Kyle prepare. She brought the ceremonial garb he was to wear, a fitted suit of silver and white fabric, woven tight and smooth, with patterns stitched along the collar and cuffs in thread that seemed to shift color when it caught the light. Kyle put it on. It fit perfectly. The Athrani tailors had taken his measurements weeks ago and had adjusted the design to his human frame. It looked Athrani, but it felt like it was made for him. He had asked for one addition, and they had allowed it. The Earth Alliance insignia, small and dark blue, stitched over his heart. Siva looked him over and gave a small approving nod. "You look acceptable," she said. Kyle had learned by now that from Siva, acceptable was high praise. The ceremony was held on the summit of Mount Vela, a most sacred site on the planet. It was a flat-topped peak, high above the clouds, ringed with ancient crystal formations that caught the first light of dawn and scattered it into 1,000 colors. The air up there was thin and cold and perfectly clear. Kyle was flown up in a ceremonial transport. When the doors opened and he stepped out, his breath caught in his throat. The summit was filled with people. Thousands of Athrani in formal dress, standing in curved rows along the natural terraces of the mountaintop. Among them, in a special section, were the Concord representatives, ambassadors from 12 different species, all watching with great interest. Kyle walked the stone path to the altar, a raised platform of dark crystal at the center of the summit. Thalrek was already there, standing tall in robes of deep silver. Beside him stood the Elder Seer, an ancient Athrani so old that her silver skin had turned almost white, and her eyes glowed faintly even in the daylight. She was the one who would speak the words of the ceremony. Kyle took his place at the altar and waited. His heart was hammering. His palms were sweating. He did his best to stand still and look calm. Then Alindra arrived. She came up the path slowly, flanked by 2 attendants. She wore a gown that Kyle could not have described, even if he had tried. It was made of light, actual captured light, woven into fabric by a technique the Athrani had perfected over thousands of years. It moved like water and glowed like a star. Her silver skin shone beneath it, and her amber eyes caught the rising sun and burned like fire. Kyle forgot how to breathe for a second. She reached the altar and stood across from him. Their eyes met. She looked calm, but Kyle could see the faintest tremble in her hands. She was nervous too. That made him feel a little better. The Elder Seer raised her hands, and the crowd fell into perfect silence. She began to speak in Old Athrani, a language so old that even most modern Athrani only understood parts of it. Her voice was thin, but carried across the summit like it was being amplified by the mountain itself. The ceremony had 3 vows. The first was the vow of presence, a promise to stand beside your partner in peace and in war, in calm and in crisis, to be there, always. The Elder Seer spoke the vow and then looked at Kyle. It was his turn. Kyle had spent weeks learning the words. His Athrani was rough, his accent was heavy, and he knew he sounded like a child trying to speak a language meant for poets. But he spoke the words clearly and without hesitation. The crowd stirred. No alien had ever spoken the binding vows in Old Athrani. The fact that Kyle had learned them, imperfectly but sincerely, rippled through the audience like a wave. Alindra spoke her vow in return, her voice steady and clear. The second was the vow of truth, a promise to never hide behind lies, even when the truth was hard, even when it would be easier to look away. Kyle spoke this one with ease. He had always been an honest person, sometimes too honest. His mother used to say he could not lie to save his life. He had never seen that as a strength until now. Alindra spoke her vow. Her eyes were locked on his. The third was the vow of becoming, a promise to grow, to change, to let your partner change you in return. This was the hardest vow for most Athrani, who valued stability and tradition above almost everything. Change was not something they welcomed easily. For Kyle, It was the easiest vow he had ever made. Humans were built for change. They had gone from caves to starships in the blink of a cosmic eye. Adapting was what they did best. He spoke the words, Alindra spoke hers, and the elder seer nodded. She reached into a small crystal box and withdrew 2 thin bands of living crystal, smooth and warm, glowing faintly with an inner light. She placed one around Kyle's left wrist and one around Alindra's. The crystal tightened gently, fitting itself to their skin, and then pulsed once with a soft, warm glow. These were the binding marks. They would glow faintly for the rest of their lives, visible proof of the bond between them. They could not be removed. They could not be faked. The elder seer raised her voice one final time and spoke the closing words of the ceremony. The translation was simple. What has been joined cannot be unjoined. What has been spoken cannot be unspoken. Go forward together. The summit erupted in the sound of thousands of hands clapping in that slow, rhythmic beat of respect. Thalric stepped forward. He looked at the crowd, then at Kyle, then at the gathered Concord ambassadors. Today, he said, his deep voice carrying across the mountain, the Athrani Dominion is joined not only to a man, but to a people. Let the galaxy know that humanity has shown itself through courage, through endurance, and through the simplest and most powerful act there is, kindness without the expectation of reward. He turned to Kyle. You asked me once if I believed there was more to your kind than we assumed. You have given me my answer. The ambassadors from the other Concord species looked at each other. Kyle could see it in their faces. Something was shifting. Not just in Athrani politics, but in the way the galaxy saw humans. For decades, humanity had been the new species, a loud, messy, short-lived race that fought too much and talked too fast. They were tolerated, but not respected. They were given a seat at the table, but not a voice. That was changing now. In the weeks that followed, Kyle's story spread across Concord space. News channels on 100 worlds carried the story of the human who had crashed on Velora Prime, saved a princess with nothing but a plasma cutter and stubbornness, survived the ancient trials, won a duel against a trained Athrani warrior, and earned the binding through sheer force of will. Earth's provisional seat on the Galactic Concord was made permanent 6 months later. The vote was not even close. Kyle and Alindra settled into their new life together. It was not easy. They were from different worlds in every sense of the word. She was formal where he was casual. She thought in centuries. He thought in days. She found his habit of talking to himself strange. He found her habit of standing perfectly still for 20 minutes while thinking even stranger. But they made it work. She taught him Athrani history, politics, and the art of moving through a room full of nobles without offending anyone. He taught her card games, how to make scrambled eggs on a cant stove, and the human art of sarcasm, which she took to with alarming skill. They argued, they laughed, they sat together on the balcony of the palace on quiet evenings and watched the 2 moons rise over the Silver City. One night, months after the ceremony, Alindra turned to him and asked the question he had been waiting for. Do you regret it? Any of it? Kyle thought about it. He thought about Ohio, about his shuttle, about the quiet, small life he had expected to live. He thought about the crash, the fire, the trials, the duel, the blood, the bruises, the fear. Then he thought about Alindra standing across from him on the mountaintop, glowing like a star, speaking vows in a language older than human civilization. He thought about the way she laughed when she finally understood one of his jokes. He thought about the crystal band on his wrist, warm against his skin, glowing softly in the dark. Not for a second, he said. She leaned against him. Among the Athrani, It was a gesture more meaningful than a kiss. It meant trust. It meant safety. It meant home. "Good," she said, "because there is no unbinding." Kyle smiled. Would not want one. Somewhere out in the galaxy, a species that had been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed for its entire short history, had just changed everything. Not with warships, not with technology, not with threats or trade deals or political games. With a man who saw someone in trouble, ran toward the danger instead of away from it, and never once thought to ask what he would get in return. That was humanity. That had always been humanity. And the galaxy was only just beginning to understand what that meant. The news spread through the HFY Corp like fire through dry grass. A human had accepted the binding with the heir to the sovereign throne. Some reacted with quiet curiosity. Others reacted with outrage. And one reacted with fury. Lord Mareth Tyvos was one of the most powerful nobles in the Dominion. He was old, rich, and used to getting what he wanted. For years he had been grooming his son, Corvin, to be joined with Alindra. It was supposed to be a sure thing. A union between the Tyvos and Sylvanas houses would have made Mareth the second most powerful person on Valora Prime. He had planned it, he had invested in it, he had counted on it. And now a human supply pilot from a backwater planet had taken it all away. "This is an insult to our people," Mareth said in a closed meeting of the Sovereign Council. "A human cannot be bound to an HFY. They live barely a century. They are fragile. They are emotional. They do not belong in our bloodline." Falric listened to this with a face that gave away nothing. "The law does not mention species," he said calmly. "It mentions character." "The law was written when the only people on this planet were HFY," Mareth snapped. "It was never meant for outsiders. And yet, it does not exclude them." Mareth left the meeting with his jaw tight and his fists clenched. He was not done. Not by a long way. Kyle, meanwhile, had bigger problems than politics. Before the binding ceremony could take place, he had to complete the trials of Vela. 3 tests that every binding candidate had to pass. These trials were designed for HFY, beings who were taller, stronger, faster, and more heat-resistant than humans. No human had ever attempted them. No one expected Kyle to survive them. The first trial was the trial of endurance. Kyle was taken to the Ashenmere, a vast volcanic desert at the planet's equator. The ground was black rock. The air shimmered with heat. Vents in the ground shot steam and sulfur at random. The temperature was over 50 degrees Celsius. The task was simple. Cross 40 miles of it on foot. No vehicles, no outside help, just a pack of water and whatever gear you could carry. The HFY candidates, 4 of them, set off with long, easy strides. Their bodies were built for heat. Their silver skin reflected sunlight, and their internal cooling systems kept them comfortable. They moved like the desert was a park. Kyle was soaking through his clothes within the first hour. By the 3rd hour, he was dizzy. By the 5th, he was seeing spots. His human body was not made for this. The heat was crushing him. But Kyle had something the HFY did not expect. He was stubborn. He had rigged a cooling system from parts of his survival kit. A set of wet bandages that he draped over his neck and head and re-soaked from his water supply every 30 minutes. He walked at a steady pace, not fast, not slow, just constant. When his legs wanted to stop, he kept going. When his vision blurred, he counted his steps out loud to keep himself focused. When he fell, he got back up. He crossed the finish line last, dead last. He was sunburned, dehydrated, and barely standing. But he was standing. The HFY who had gathered to watch did not cheer. They did something more meaningful. They went silent. In HFY culture, silence was a mark of deep respect. The second trial was the trial of mind. It was a strategy game called Vela's Web. played on a holographic board with hundreds of floating pieces that moved and changed based on your decisions. The rules were complex and layered in ways that made chess look like a children's game. Kyle had never seen it before. Alindra was allowed, by tradition, to teach him. They spent every free moment in her private study, sitting across from each other at a practice board, while she explained the rules and he tried to keep up. He lost his first practice game in 11 moves. He lost his second in 9. By the third game, Alindra was looking at him with something close to pity. "This game has been played by my people for 6,000 years, she said gently. It is not a failure to struggle with it. I am not struggling, Kyle said, resetting the board. I am learning. He played again, and again, and again. He stopped trying to play like an Athrani. Their style was built on long-term planning, patience, and elegant patterns. Kyle did not have 6,000 years of cultural instinct to draw from, so he found his own way. He bluffed, he sacrificed pieces to create openings. He made moves that looked like mistakes, but set up traps 3 turns later. He played fast and messy and unpredictable. In the actual trial, he was matched against Corvin Tyvos, Merith's son, who was considered one of the best young players in the Dominion. Corvin was tall, calm, and moved his pieces with the smooth confidence of someone who had been playing since childhood. Kyle lost the first round, badly. The audience whispered. They had expected nothing less. In the second round, Kyle made a move so strange that the judges stopped the game for 10 minutes to check if it was legal. It was. Corvin stared at the board with a confused expression. Kyle pressed the advantage and won the round. He lost the third round, but it was close. The judges, for the first time in centuries, awarded him a special commendation for creative strategy. It was not a win, but it was something no one had expected. And in a society that valued tradition above almost everything, doing something no one had ever seen before was its own kind of victory. The third trial was the trial of courage. Kyle was placed in a sealed arena, a wide circular pit surrounded by high walls of smooth crystal. The floor was covered in sand and scattered with boulders and broken pillars. And waiting for him at the other end was a Vyloran shadow beast. It was the size of a large horse, covered in dark, oily fur that seemed to absorb light. It had 6 legs, each ending in claws as long as Kyle's forearm. Its face was flat and eyeless, but lined with rows of teeth. It hunted by sound and vibration. The rules were simple. Survive for 5 minutes. No weapons beyond a short staff. Just stay alive. Kyle did not try to fight it head-on. That would have been suicide. Instead, he used the arena. He moved from boulder to boulder, staying light on his feet, changing direction constantly. When the beast charged, he rolled aside and let it crash into the rocks. He threw loose sand to confuse its senses. He climbed a broken pillar and dropped down behind it when it lunged. 5 minutes passed. He kept going. At the 6-minute mark, the beast cornered him against a wall. Kyle had nowhere to go. The creature lowered its head and let out a rumbling growl that Kyle could feel in his chest. Kyle gripped his staff, planted his feet, and did something no Athrani had ever done in the arena. He yelled. Not a battle cry, not a scream. A raw, deep, human shout that bounced off the crystal walls and hit the beast like a slap. The shadow beast flinched, just for a second. Kyle dove sideways, rolled under its belly, and came up running on the other side. The timer hit 7 minutes. The handlers pulled the beast back. Kyle stood in the center of the arena, breathing hard, covered in sand and scratches, his staff broken in half. Then, from somewhere high in the stands, someone began to clap. Others joined. The sound grew and filled the arena. Thousands of hands beating together in slow, steady respect. That evening, A Lindra came to see him in the medical room. He was sitting on a table, while a healer treated the claw marks on his arm. "You lasted 7 minutes," she said. "Was aiming for 8, but that thing was fast. You could have died, but I did not." She stood in front of him, and very slowly reached out and placed her hand over his. Among the HFY, casual touch was almost unheard of. It was a gesture that carried deep meaning, trust, respect, and something more. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not for the trials, for trying." Kyle looked at her hand on his, then he looked at her face. Something had changed between them. He could feel it. It was not love, not the way humans usually meant it, but it was the beginning of something real. "I told your father I would figure this out," Kyle said. "I meant it." She nodded. "I know. That is what scares me." "Scares you?" "Because I am starting to believe you." Outside the medical room, in a shadowed corridor, Lord Marith Tyvos stood listening. His face was calm, but his eyes were burning. The human had passed the trials. The court was starting to respect him. The binding was going to happen, unless something changed. Marith intended to change it. Kyle Dawson never planned to be a hero. He was just a lieutenant in the Earth Alliance, a regular guy from a small town in Ohio, who joined the service because he wanted to see the stars. His job was simple: fly supplies from one station to another, drop them off, fly back. Nothing fancy, nothing dangerous. That was supposed to be the deal. But the galaxy had other plans for him. His shuttle was passing near Velora Prime, a beautiful green and silver planet that belonged to the HFY, when the gravity field grabbed his ship like a giant invisible hand. The engines screamed. The control panel lit up with red warnings. Kyle pulled every lever and hit every switch he knew, but the shuttle was already falling. It punched through the upper atmosphere, tore through a forest of crystal trees that shattered like a million pieces of glass, and slammed into a riverbank so hard the whole frame bent in half. Kyle dragged himself out through the cracked windshield. He was bleeding from a deep cut above his eye. His hands were burned from sparking wires. There was a sharp pain in his left side that told him he had cracked a rib, maybe 2. His radio was smashed. His emergency beacon was flickering on and off, too weak to be sure anyone could hear it. He looked around. The forest was not like anything on Earth. The trees were made of crystal, tall and pale blue, glowing faintly in the afternoon light. The river was clear and cold. The air smelled like metal and flowers. It was beautiful, and it was completely alien. Kyle was alone on a planet that belonged to one of the most powerful species in the known galaxy. The HFY were ancient. They had been flying between stars for thousands of years before humans even figured out how to build a wheel. They were tall, with smooth silver skin and large amber eyes. They were proud, formal, and deeply unimpressed by humanity. Most HFY thought of humans the way a grown adult might think of a noisy toddler at a dinner party. They put up with them, but they did not take them seriously. Kyle knew all of this. He also knew that standing around feeling sorry for himself was not going to fix anything. So he did what he always did when things went wrong. He got to work. He pulled his survival kit from the shuttle wreck. He cleaned the cut on his face with river water and sealed it with med gel. He wrapped his ribs tight with bandage tape. He built a fire using his plasma lighter and strips of dry crystal bark that burned slow and hot. He ate a ration bar that tasted like dust and salt, drank water from the river after running it through his filter, and set up a small shelter against the side of the shuttle using a thermal blanket. Night came fast. The sky turned deep purple and filled with more stars than Kyle had ever seen, even from space. 2 moons hung above the horizon, one silver and one pale gold. Strange sounds drifted through the crystal forest, clicks and hums and long, low calls that could have been animals, or could have been the trees themselves singing in the wind. Kyle slept with his back against the shuttle, and his hand on his sidearm. He did not sleep well. On the second morning, just after sunrise, he heard the scream. It was not a human sound. It was high and sharp, like a bell cracking, and it echoed through the crystal trees in a way that made Kyle's skin prickle. It came from the east, maybe half a mile through the forest. Kyle grabbed his kit, checked his sidearm, and ran toward it. He found the crash site in a clearing. A sky barge, one of the HFY flying transports, shaped like a long silver leaf, had come down hard through the canopy. It was broken into 3 pieces. The front section was crumpled against a massive crystal trunk. Sparks were shooting from a power cell in the back, and Kyle could hear the high-pitched whine of an energy overload building. He had heard that sound before, in training. It meant the thing was going to blow, and soon. Under a heavy metal beam near the front of the wreck, there was an HFY woman. She was tall, even lying on the ground. Her silver skin was streaked with violet, which Kyle realized was blood. One of her legs was pinned under the beam, and she could not move it. Her large amber eyes were full of pain and fear. She saw him and went still. "You are human," she said. Her voice was strained, but clear. "Yeah," Kyle said. He was already pulling the plasma cutter from his belt. "I am going to get you out of here." "The power cell," she said, turning her head toward the back of the wreck. "It is going to explode." "I know, that's why we need to hurry." The plasma cutter was a small tool, meant for fixing shuttle panels, not cutting through heavy structural metal. Kyle pushed it as hard as it could go. The blade bit into the beam and began to carve through, painfully slow. Sweat dripped down his face. The whine from the power cell was getting louder and higher. 3 minutes. It took 3 full minutes to cut through the beam. Every second felt like an hour. The HFY woman watched him the entire time, her jaw clenched, her fingers digging into the dirt. When the cut was done, Kyle shoved a thick crystal branch under the severed section and used it as a lever. He pushed with everything he had. The beam shifted. Not much, but enough. He reached down, grabbed her under the arms, and pulled. She cried out in pain as her leg came free. Kyle did not stop. He lifted her off the ground. She was taller and heavier than him, and his cracked ribs screamed in protest. But he did not put her down. He ran. The power cell blew when they were maybe 30 meters away. The explosion was huge. A column of violet fire shot into the sky like a rocket. The blast wave hit Kyle in the back and threw them both forward into the dirt. He had turned at the last second to put his body between her and the heat. Burning debris rained down around them. Something hot hit his shoulder, and he grunted, but did not move until it was over. When the noise faded and the dust began to settle, Kyle was lying on the ground next to her, breathing hard. His jacket was smoking. His back felt like it was on fire. She stared at him with those wide amber eyes. "You are either very brave or very stupid," she whispered. "Little bit of both," Kyle said. He got up slowly, helped her sit, and then carried her back to his camp. It took almost an hour. He had to stop twice, to rest, leaning against crystal trees, with her weight on his shoulder, his ribs burning with every breath. She did not complain. She just watched him, with a look he could not understand. At the camp, he set her down gently near the fire. Her leg was badly hurt, swollen and bruised, possibly broken. He did not know HFY biology well enough to be sure. He used medgel to close the deep cuts on her calf. He wrapped her leg tight with bandages to keep it still. He gave her a painkiller from his kit, after asking her twice if human medicine would hurt her. She said it would not. She swallowed it and made a face. "That is the worst thing I have ever tasted," she said. "Welcome to human medicine," Kyle said. She told him her name was Alindra. She said she had been flying alone to a temple in the mountains for a private ceremony, when her sky barge lost power. She did not tell him anything else. He just made sure she had water, offered her a ration bar that she took one bite of, and politely refused, and settled in to keep watch. Night fell again. Kyle sat across from her by the fire, his sidearm in his lap, listening to the sounds of the alien forest. Alindra was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke. "Why did you help me?" Kyle looked at her. "You were trapped. I am a Thrani. You are human. My people have not been kind to yours. Does not matter. It matters to most." Kyle poked the fire with a stick. "Where I come from, if someone is hurt and you can help, you help. You do not ask who they are first. You just do it." She stared at him like he had said something impossible. "That is not how the rest of the galaxy works." "Maybe it should be," Kyle said. 3 days they waited. Kyle kept her fed, kept her leg clean, and helped her move when she needed to. They talked more. She was stiff and careful at first, but Kyle had a way of making people feel easy. He told her about Earth, about Ohio, about the time he crashed his bike into a mailbox when he was 12 and broke his arm. She told him about the crystal forests, about the 2 moons, about the songs her people sang to the stars. By the 3rd day, she was almost smiling. Then the sky filled with the roar of engines. A military transport dropped through the canopy, and 20 Athrani soldiers in bright silver armor surrounded the camp. Their weapons were drawn and pointed at Kyle. Their commander, a tall officer with a hard face, looked at Alindra, then at Kyle. His expression changed. "You are the human?" the commander asked. "I helped her, yes," Kyle said, his hands raised. The commander shook his head slowly. "You have no idea who she is." Kyle looked at Alindra. She would not look back. "She is Alindra Sylvanas," Kyle said softly, "daughter of High Sovereign Falric Sylvanas, heir to the throne of the Athrani Dominion. You saved the life of a princess, human. And among our people, that means something you are not ready for." Kyle stood there, bloody, bruised, his jacket still scorched from the explosion, holding an empty ration wrapper in one hand. "Well," he said, "that is going to be a problem."